going to take our lesson from the book of Esther, and we're going to look at a motif or a theme. You know the story of Esther. We're not going to rehash that, but I want to draw our lesson from one of the themes, the motifs that perhaps you've seen, perhaps it's never really been pointed out to you, but I think it is one that is of interest and one that is intentional and one that could be a great lesson for us this evening. And that is the excesses of Esther. We're going to use that to just remind ourselves of the danger of excessive living. The book of Esther is a story about God's people entering into, not for the first time, a powerful pagan empire. Men like Abraham, Joseph, and Daniel are a few of the others that have done the same thing, entering into the throne room of a Gentile king. But part of the lesson of this story, though it might be a subtle lesson, is how excessive people, rulers, and those with even just a little bit of power can become excessive. And ultimately, it will show us the end of such excessive living. Now, the thing about it, we talk about excessive living and the dangers of it, we often look at ourselves and say, well, I'm not excessive. The guy up the street, the guy up the hill, the guy in the more expensive, he's excessive, right? Where we live, most of you have been there, we live on the base of a little hill, right? We're in the poor section of the neighborhood. And up on the hill are these $1 million+ homes. And it's really easy for me to think, wow, those are the people that are really wealthy and really excessive. I'm not that way. But if we're going to make that type of comparison, well, we equally can make a comparison to where we find someone that is far less excessive than us. And we become the excessive ones. And we can't just have one without the other. And so the reality is that all of us can fall to that danger of excess living. The truth is that when we have a little, naturally you want more. And the problem is, where does the more stop? Wanting more can lead to other things like discontentment, complaining if we don't get it, anxiety if we feel like we're about to lose it. There was a woman once who bought an extravagant dress, brought it home and showed her husband, to which he quickly asked her, why did it have to be so expensive? Knowing that her husband was upset, she said, the devil made me buy it. Knowing his Bible, the husband responded, well, why didn't you just say, get behind me, Satan? To which the woman replied, I did. But Satan said it looked as good from the back as it did the front, so I had to buy it. I remember feeding our babies. And one of the things when you start feeding them the solid foods, they always tell you, you have to start that baby food with the vegetables. If you start off with the sweet fruits and the sweet baby food, they're not going to eat that vegetable, right? You get that sweet stuff and you just want more of it. And that can be true of us as well. And so let's get into the Bible study portion of our lesson, the excesses of Esther. You know the story, but let's take a look at chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. Now it took place in the days of Ahasuerus, that Ahasuerus reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. I want you to think about that in your mind. His kingdom expanded from Medo-Persia to India to Ethiopia, a total of 127 provinces. That's huge. That's an excessively large kingdom. And I want you to keep that in mind because that's going to play out several times in this lesson. So in verse 2, in those days, as King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of his princes and attendants, the army officers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of his provinces being in his presence. And he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days. How many days? 180 days. Keep that in mind. Now, when these days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present at the citadel in Susa, from the greatest to the least, in the court of the guard of the king's palace. I want you to notice what's going on. This king has this banquet, this drinking party, where he is showing off all of his excess for how long? 6 months. A 6-month drinking party. And after that, he has another, this one just a week long, 7-day drinking party of everyone in the capital city, from the greatest to the least. Now, you might remember the story. At the same time, Queen Vashti is having her own party with the women of the kingdom. Why so much excess? Why such a long party? Well, some have answered this to say that what King Xerxes, and that's what Ahasuerus is connected with, the same as being King Xerxes, believes that this is a military planning party. You'll notice his military officers are there. And he is planning out their attack on the Greeks. And they say, well, what's going on here? He's not just showing off all of his excess, but that he's saying to all of his upper echelon of officers, we are definitely going to win. Just look at how successful we've been. Well, you might remember King Hezekiah did the same thing, and that didn't quite work out so well for him. And we know that it's not going to work out so well for the Medos and the Persians when it comes to the Greek Empire. And so you have this excessive drinking party. In fact, notice how it's described. The author decides, let me tell you about this banquet hall. Verse 6. There were hangings of fine white and violet linen held by cords of fine purple linen on silver rings and marble columns. There were couches of gold and silver on mosaic pavement of porphyr, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plentiful according to the king's bounty. The drinking was done according to law. There was no compulsion, for the king had given orders for each official of the household that he should do according to the desires of each person. And Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. There's a whole lot of excessive partying going on. And in fact, as he is showing off all of this excess, all of this success, he finally thinks, well, I'm going to show off my wife, the queen. And that's where his excess starts getting him into trouble. as she refuses to come. So we know what happens. He decides, I'm going to replace the queen who refused to obey me. And so even that is excessive in the story. Look, if you would, at chapter 2, verse 1. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed against her. Then the king's attendants who served him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king. Let the king appoint overseers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather every beautiful young virgin to the citadel Susa, to the harem, into the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who's in charge of the women, and let their cosmetics be given them. And then let the young lady who pleases the king be queen in place of Vashti. And the matter pleased the king, and he did accordingly. Do you see what's going on here? This isn't, hey, let's get some young virgins from the capital and you choose from them. Or let's get a few of these young virgins and you can choose. We're going to take every beautiful young virgin of all of these 127 provinces, take them out of their houses, take them away from the family, put them in the king's harem, and then out of one of those, you're going to choose a wife. You're going to choose the queen. They're all going to be your wives, but one's going to be the queen. So you have this idea that all these young virgins are taken out of their homes, and those that don't make it, this isn't The Bachelor where, they are eliminated and they go home one by one. They're part of the king's harem from here on out. That's excessive. But that's the type of person the king is. He doesn't want to miss out on any possible choice. And that's kind of the world we live in. We live in a world full of choices. And we think, well, that's just a great thing. But in fact, having a lot of choices sometimes can lead actually to a person being sorrowful or upset or discontent, thinking, I made the wrong choice. Think about your favorite restaurant. How many things are on their menu? And yet you get the same thing every time, right? You don't go for all the right. You get the thing that you know and it's good and you enjoy. You get it time and time again. Think about restaurants like In-N-Out. If you want a salad, do you go to In-N-Out? They don't do salads. You want a chicken sandwich, do you go to In-N-Out? They don't do chicken sandwiches. You want a steak, you just go on and on. They do one thing, and people love it because they do it so well. You're going to get the quality every single time. Excess thinks that we're going to be happy, but oftentimes it leaves us discontented. And then notice as well, the third excess is involved in the queen. Look, if you would, chapter 2, verse 12. We've got all these young virgins of the entire kingdom gathered together, and here's the plan. Now, when the turn of each young lady came to go into King Ahasuerus, after the end of her 12 months under the regulations for women, for the days of her beautification were completed as follows: 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and the cosmetics for women. The young lady would go into the king in this way. Anything that she desired was given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. Boy, you think, man, it takes a long time for your wife to get ready every morning. These virgins went on a year-long makeover. They're already the most beautiful young virgins of the entire kingdom. He was in no hurry. That's excessive. That's excessive. But that's the people we're dealing with here. And then, number 4, we're dealt with the enemy of the story, the antagonist, the king's vizier. It's very common to have a vizier. What is a vizier? Well, basically what we would probably think of is the prime minister, the vice president. Think, if you will, Haman being like Joseph. Not in character, but in position. And so Haman, what kind of man is Haman? He is this self-absorbed man. He is prideful. He is arrogant. He is excessive. And he would love nothing more than to be the king. But he knows he can't be the king. And so the second thing is he wants to be treated like the king. And the thing is, he gets what he wishes. The king bestows on him great position and great authority and great honors. And everyone in the capital bows down to him with the exception of one person. Mordecai. He will not bow down to him. In fact, I don't know if you ever read it this way, Haman never sees Mordecai not bowing down to him. How does he know? He learns of it. They tell him. In fact, look if you would at chapter 3, verse 4. Chapter 3, verse 4. Now, it was when they had spoken daily to Mordecai, and he would not listen to them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's reason would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew. So here these people see Mordecai not bowing to Haman. They're saying, listen, are you out of your head? You better bow down or this is going to be bad for you. And Mordecai says, well, I'm not going to do it. Well, why not? He says, because I'm a Jew. And scenes of Daniel keep popping into our mind at this point. And so they go to Haman. They say, listen, Mordecai doesn't bow down to you, but it's because he's a Jew. And here's Haman's response, verse 5. When Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage to him, Haman was filled with rage. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him who the people of Mordecai were. And therefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. He's mad at one man, but what's he going to do? He's going to excess. He's going to kill all the Jews. That's excessive, isn't it? Isn't it funny how history repeats itself? We had this world leader named Hitler, who from my education had some bad run-ins with certain Jews. So what's his answer? Kill them all. Kill them all. That's Haman. His name also starts with an H. But even in that, number 5, look if you would at chapter 5, verse 10. Some of the story goes on, but he's still wanting to kill all the Jews, and now he's even gotten so upset, he's going to go ahead and kill Mordecai at the advice of his wife. But let's look at kind of this excessive man here. Look if you would, chapter 5, verse 10. Haman controlled himself. However, he went to his house and sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh. And look at this. Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches, the number of his sons, and every instance where the king had magnified him, and how he had promoted him above the princes and the servants of the king. Haman also said, even Esther the queen, let no one but me come to the king to the banquet which she has prepared. And tomorrow also I'm invited by her with the king. Oh, I'm feeling down, so let me feel better about myself. How am I going to do that? I'm calling my friends, so-called friends. I'm going to call my wife, and I'm just going to boast and brag about all my excess. Made him happy, didn't it? Look at verse 13. Yet all of this does not satisfy me. Every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Here's a man that has so much excess, and he's not happy. Why? Because of the one thing he doesn't have. A lot of choices doesn't mean you're going to be happy. A lot of excess doesn't mean you're going to be thrilled. In fact, oftentimes, it leads you to just focus on the one thing you don't have. And so verse 14, his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, have gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it, and then go joyfully with the king to the banquet. And the advice pleased Haman. And so he had the gallows made. Well, obviously, this is advice of his wife and his friends. They're excessive too. And what's their advice? To make these gallows. Now, when we say gallows, we think of, those old day hanging machines, right? But from my study, what the word here actually means is a tree. And from certain studies, it appears that the Persians' execution system was to impale someone on a piece of wood, a sharp impaling stick, or something like a tree. But whatever it might be, I want you to think about, they want him not just to make these gallows or this impaling stick, they want him to make it 50 cubits wide, or 50 cubits high. Now, to kind of picture this, I want you to take the Ark of Noah, and I want you to get the best picture of the Ark of Noah and its size. You got that in your mind? The width of Noah's Ark was 50 cubits, approximately 75 feet wide. That's how high they want to make these gallows. Isn't that a little excessive? And so you've got these excesses in the book of Esther by these excessive people. And maybe there's some others. I've introduced you to the idea. You can study it and you can find the others. But I want, as we close, I want to go over 3 lessons real quick with you, and the lesson will be yours. Number 1, I think we learn in this that excess living is a result of selfish living. It's a byproduct of it. It's a result of someone that decides, I'm going to live for self. And I've thought of this long and hard. Selfishness is the key to every sin. I'm trying to think of a sin that doesn't involve self first and foremost. Can you think of one? Excess living is a result of selfish, sinful living. Let's face it, sin has this, what I like to call this snowball effect. You know, this image we have of this little snowball up on the top of the mountain, and it gets going down the mountain, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and more snow gets added to it. And finally, it's at the bottom, and it's this huge snowball, not this little one, this huge snowball. Well, that's what sin does. One drink leads to another because we say, well, I had one, what's the harm? But then I had two. Well, what's the harm with a third and a fourth and a fifth? Until we're in that accident. And we've killed someone. Which happens every single day in this country. Several times. A little party next time becomes a raging drunken brawl. There is this thing about sin that people that find sin somehow exhilarating and thrilling and kind of the wildlife, that you give in a little bit, but the next time it can't be the same. It's got to be a little more dangerous and a little more exciting and a little bit more wild. It has a snowball effect. And it has a searing effect. The more sin is practiced, the easier it becomes. Just give it a try. Just try it once. It's the old mantra. But we know what happens. It just goes more and more and more. Because there is a family of sin. We start with selfishness. But that's not where selfishness ends up. It's not just self and doing this or doing that. But selfishness, what? Well, selfishness has a family. He's got these twins called pride and arrogance. He's got a wife called pleasure. He's got a daughter named folly. He has another son called control. And then last but not least, one untimely born, he's got apathy. And as you look at these characters of excess in the book of Esther, you see this very progression. It doesn't stop with just selfishness. Sin is a family that keeps producing. And if it's not stopped, it just will keep going on and on. Strife and anger and division and hate. 1 Timothy 6:9, but those who want to get rich fall into temptation and snare and many foolish and harmful desires which plunge men into ruin and destruction. Men who want to get rich, who want to have it all, who want to have excess. It's a snare, it's a temptation. It's a way of ruin and destruction. James chapter 4, verse 14, but if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. I want you to notice, this is exactly what we're talking about. Number one, we start with bitter jealousy and selfish ambition. There's the selfishness. He says, watch out. Stop it right there. Don't have what? Don't let arrogance join the family. Don't let lying come to fruition. It builds up. It's that snowball effect. Verse 16, he says, for where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is what? There's disorder and every evil thing. Wait till you get to the end of this story. Number two, excess living leaves common sense and decency in the dust. If a little is good, then a lot is even better, people think. But at some point, you just lose control. At some point, you just lose common sense. There's no more balance. It's just, hey, I wanted it before, I got it, I'll take it all. Excess goes overboard without asking any questions. That's why it's so dangerous. The king didn't want a virgin. He wanted what? He wanted all of them. no matter what. He didn't think about taking them away from their family. He didn't think about what effect it would have on them. He didn't think, there's just no way I'm going to be able to have all these concubines and give them a great life. He didn't care. That's what happens with excess. You know, you and I, we think, man, I'd really like to have that, but I can't. What? Because we can't afford it. It's not the time to buy that. We don't really need it. But if you start buying stuff that you don't need and you can't afford, pretty soon you're just going to say, I did it before, I can do it again. All of decency, all common sense, all balance gets thrown out the door. That's dangerous. That's dangerous. Proverbs 23, 6 and 7. Do not eat the bread of a selfish man, or desire his delicacies. For as he thinks within himself, so he is. He says to you, eat and drink, but his heart is not with you. You can't trust a self-absorbed, selfish man, because it's always about him. When you're not going to be good for him anymore, watch out. Proverbs 15:21. Folly is joy to him who lacks sense, but a man of understanding walks straight. And finally, excess living leaves you with nothing. And that's the deception of this temptation. That's the ironic twist. And there's so many sins like this that they have this ironic twist that sin promises you so much and delivers absolutely nothing. In the end, we know the story. Haman is hung on his own death trap. He thought he was building those gallows for Mordecai. He was building them for himself. In the end, it destroyed him. Now, the story of King Ahasuerus is not told, it's not his death, in the book of Esther. But historically, we learn that Ahasuerus is murdered by one of his own people, his own advisors. That's a sad ending. That sounds a lot like this parable Jesus gave about a man that was so successful, he tore down his little barn to build bigger barns and thought to himself, now I can eat, drink, and be merry. I can have an excess. I can do as I please. I don't have to think about things or calculate cost. I can give into my heart as I please. And Jesus said, you fool. This very night, your soul is required. You think you have everything, but in the end, you'll have nothing. But as we close, let me leave you with this positive idea. Just as there is a family of sin that leads to excess living, there is also a family, listen, of righteousness that leads to the right kind of excess. Not all excess is bad. There's a good type of excess, and it's called righteous excess. And so where there is righteousness, it doesn't just stay that way. Righteousness gives birth to love and care and kindness, gentleness, mercy, concern, and on and on and on. There is a snowball effect to righteousness. And that's the type of access that we want in our lives. And if we can help you tonight to have that kind of snowball effect in your life, to have the right type of excess living, won't you let that be known as together we stand.